before Adelaide became known for quiet streets and open skies, there was a place built to control fear. For more than 100 years, their walls confined thousands of lives. Some were guilty. Some were forgotten. Some never left at all. This is Adelaide Jail. This Adelaide Jail in North Adelaide. It opened in 1841. In the early years of South Australia, the colony was meant to be free. Yet this prison was built early to control order and fear. This was the jail's medical center. Prisoners were treated here, but care was limited, and punishment often came before health. Doctors were not permanently based on the jail. They usually visited when required, especially for injuries, serious illness, or before executions. Medical care focused more on keeping prisoners fit enough for labor and confinement, rather than long-term treatment or recovery. Mental illness was poorly understood at that time, and many prisoners who needed care were instead kept in isolation, which often worsened their condition. Yard 2 was one of the internal exercise yard at Adelaide Jail. It was used to separate prisoners into different groups based on class, behavior, or sentence. Time spent here was limited and closely supervised. Movement was controlled. One of the most remembered names connected to Adelaide Jail is Elizabeth Woolcock. Elizabeth Woolcock was the only woman executed in South Australia, hanged at Adelaide Jail on December 30th, 1873, for poisoning her abusive husband, Thomas Woolcock, with mercury. Though significant doubt remains about her guilt, with many believing she was a victim of domestic violence and an unfair trial, her tragic story, involving a traumatic childhood and a rushed legal process. Elizabeth Woolcock's story ends here, but her name remains part of the jail's memory. The room around Yard 2 were used to manage prisoners outside their main cells. One of the rooms connected to Yard 2 contains writings left behind by prisoners. They were personal expressions made during long periods of confinement, isolation, and silence. Surrounding Yard 2 were spare room, used as a part of the jail's daily operation. These rooms were not designed for comfort or rest. They were functional spaces intended for control, separation, and supervision for many inmates' daily life. A repetitive cycle moving between cell, Yard 2, and these surrounding rooms. Days followed the same pattern, and the lack of variation made time feel slower and heavier. The building was constructed to be secure and durable, with thick walls and limited opening, to prevent escape and restrict visibility. After Adelaide Jail closed in 1988, investigation and heritage restoration work revealed aspects of the prison that had long remained hidden from public. Beneath the main cell blocks were underground and isolate spaces used specifically for punishment rather than detention. Such conditions were rarely detailed in office records, which focused more on discipline and sentencing than on the human impact of imprisonment. These discoveries exposed a harsher reality of Adelaide Jail that had been deliberately minimized during its operation and fully acknowledged decades after its closure. This is a replica of the portable gallows used at Adelaide Jail. The original structure stood near this spot between 1861 and 1883. The replica was built in 2022 to mark the historical location. Yard 3 at Adelaide Jail. Initially, the debtors' yard transformed into a significant area for female prisoners before becoming the induction center, library, and more. Yard 3 Library. Yard 3 was originally the debtors' yard before they were moved to Yard 5. This was then taken over by the women until their move in December 1969. This yard contains the dormitory, built specifically for the women in 1965. It also contains the induction center, which was where prisoners were taken after being processed. Yard 3 at the Adelaide Jail had varied uses throughout its history. Evolving with the changing needs and demographics of the prison population. They could have their shower and change. This was constructed in 1978. The space was converted to an activity room in 1980. This was intended as a place of recreation and social engagement, which was part of prisons' efforts to enhance prisoners' social skills. Yard 3 contained the women's kitchen. Women also involved in craft work. Some of the pictures seen here are original drawings created by prisoners. Yard 4 consisted of two-story cell blocks which housed the male prisoners. It has been altered many times and has served a variety of uses. One section was late used as a canteen, where prisoners spent money they earned from jobs within the jail. Prisoners could purchase snacks, cigarettes, and other small items. After female were transferred from the jail in 1969, the arch was cut between these two original cells and the space became a meals and recreation area for the male prisoners. Yard 4 of Adelaide Jail is one of the most important areas in the prison. It preserves the real, everyday evidence. This yard tells the story of how the jail functioned on a daily basis. the object kept here, like uniform, sharp equipment, and other personal belongings. These are the cells of yard for prisoners spent most of their day. Little light or ventilation. Each cell was built to enforce silence, routine, and control. For many inmates, punishment here, punishment came through isolation. There were no electric sockets in the cell. All light switches were outside, and the power could be turned off if a prisoner misbehaved. On the day of an execution at Adelaide Jail, the prison followed a strict and highly controlled routine designed to keep the event secret and orderly. Executions were usually carried out early in the morning, often just after dawn, when the jail was quiet and the outside world unaware. A total of 45 executions were carried out at Adelaide Jail between 1884 to 1864. Elizabeth Woolcock was the only woman ever executed in South Australia, and her execution took place. This room at Adelaide Jail preserves information about the officers who ran the prison on a daily basis. Adelaide Jail played a major role as a remand prison through its operations, meaning many people held here had not yet been convicted of any crime. Prisoners on remand were detained while waiting trial for weeks or even months. The remand system highlights a key injustice of the time. Individuals could lose their freedom and endure serve conditions before guilty was ever proven. Today, the history of Adelaide Jail helps visitors understand that suffering within the prison was not limited to convicted criminals, but also affected those still waiting judgment. At Adelaide Jail, all weapons used by officers were kept. What you're seeing here are original iron restraints used inside Adelaide Jail during the 19th century. These include leg irons, handcuffs, and fixed iron fittings that allowed prisoners to be chained to walls or floors. This image reflects the harsh reality of colonial justice inside Adelaide Jail. Prisoners who broke prison rules or were considered defiant could be sentenced to flogging. Adelaide Jail is known as haunted because of its violent past. Executions, brutal punishments, and deaths inside the jail left a lasting mark. Many believe the stories of ghosts come from the suffering that once filled these walls. Between the 1840s and early 1900s, this jail was a place of executions, harsh punishment, and prolonged suffering. Prisoners were flogged, restrained in irons. Many inmates died within these walls, not only by execution, but from disease, despair, and brutal living conditions. Some prisoners were buried without ceremony, their stories lost to history. Long after the jail closed, staff and visitors began reporting strange experience, unexplained footsteps in empty corridors, sudden drops in temperature, voices where no one stood, sudden cold air, and shadowy figures near old cells and punishment areas. These reports are most common in places where suffering was greatest, whether seen as paranormal or psychological. The haunting reputation of Adelaide Jail reflects the weight of its past. The building remembers what happened here. A history of pain, fear, and lives cut short. Executions took place within these walls. Condemned prisoners spent their final days knowing the gallows were close, listening to the sounds of the jail continuing around them as they waited for death. The fear and psychological suffering were constant. Death was part of daily life inside Adelaide Jail. Adelaide Jail's haunting reputation reflects the emotional weight of what happened here. This is why many believe Adelaide Jail is haunted, not only by spirits, but by history itself, still lingering in the walls, the silence, and the shadows. But its history never left.